Hello. All right, this is going to be my first video lesson, so bear with me. I got to identify where the camera is. I'll try to look at that as much as possible and not somewhere over here. If you saw my posts before this on Instagram, I had to lose the blazer. It's hot down here. Anyway, so if you have the first PowerPoint with yellow journalism, that's the one that this is for. Unit 9, Lesson 1, yellow journalism. For my second period, we did most of this lesson before, so you guys could skip ahead, or you could watch this again for some kind of context, but you could follow along with the PowerPoint. I'm going to try to make the PowerPoint here as clear as I could. I actually hooked my TV up to my computer so I could have it as big as I could for you guys. So there's also a document on there that's called like classwork, and what that will be is basically your classwork. It'll have the do now, it'll have 2 activities, and it'll have an exit. And for each day, or for each lesson we do, there'll be a classwork document, which is in place of you guys taking notes or whatever, which basically is a do now, 2 activities, and an exit pass. Easy. You guys can do it with these PowerPoints or with this video. Follow along. You do it in 10 minutes. My suggestion is maybe watch, if you can do 2 devices, that would be best, or Google. If you have a computer, Google, you drag the browser to the end of the screen and you could have 2 things running at once. My suggestion is to watch this video on one device on your phone or something, and then log on the computer for Google Classroom to really follow along and type in with those documents. Or the other way around. Open it up on your phone on Google Docs, and Google Classroom apps, and then watch on the computer or whatever. All right, so lesson 1. So we're going to talk about yellow journalism. And what this really leads to is the Spanish-American War. Now, the Spanish-American War is one of the most important wars in U.S. history that not a lot of people even heard about. Or if they heard about it, they don't know a lot about it. Why this is an important war and why this is an important story for the United States. Do now. How do people get their information? Well, this has to do with information. This has to do with the media. This has to do with America on the world stage. American intervention, which means America going into other countries and, helping or hurting or just getting involved in other nations. This is really the beginning of all of that. The 3 wars that I'm going to say are going to be most important here in understanding where the United States is today is A, the Spanish-American War brings the U.S. onto the world stage. It's the entrance into imperialism for the United States. Then, obviously, World War II. World War II is this war where the United States is a superpower. It's like the U.S. envisions itself as the Superman on the world stage. Can accomplish anything. We beat the Nazis. We saved Europe with the Marshall Plan. And we made the standard of living for American families the highest that it had ever been before then, and way higher than it is today almost. So that's the second important war. And the third important war to understand the United States is Vietnam. Vietnam is the war where the United States had to look itself in the mirror and admit what it was capable of and what it wasn't capable of. And today, we're living with that Vietnam syndrome still, they call it. The fact that if I'm the Superman, why can't I go and just, liberate this tiny country that at that point not a lot of people even have heard of. It didn't make any sense. We beat the Nazis. We saved Europe. We can't save Vietnam. In Southeast Asia, it doesn't make any sense. This is a poor country. But, there were realities present there that are going to carry through, that are present in Iraq and Afghanistan and into today. So, 3 wars. Spanish-American War is number 1. That's what we'll learn about today. World War II, Vietnam. That's the trajectory that we're going to follow leading up to the modern day. So, aim. This is, I'm looking at this display here, and it's backwards, so that's why I just got to look over here. Why did the United States declare war on Spain in 1898? Well, we get into the bad habit of when we say Spanish, we mean people from Latin America, but that's not the case here. In this unit, when we say Spanish, as it should be, as it is not even in this unit, in your regular vernacular, it means people from Spain. It means the country of Spain or the empire of Spain at this point. It doesn't mean just anybody that has some kind of Spanish blood. It doesn't mean anybody of, all the countries of Latin America. Spain. We get to war with Spain, the country. Where does this war take place? Well, this war takes place in the country of Cuba. The United States goes into Cuba on behalf of the Cuban people to fight Spain, and liberate or free the Cuban people from the oppression of the Spanish Empire, which was brutal at that time. Things we're going to explore. Why did they do this? Well, why do you think they would do this? Any hands? One is, Americans hate to think that there's suffering anywhere. We are very interested in the stories about people suffering because we feel we have the power, and oftentimes we have the responsibility to go and help people because we're a rich nation. We have a powerful army. That's number one. Number two, we see sort of a reflection in their situation in what we experienced with Great Britain. About 120 years before this, there were people whose grandfathers or great-grandfathers had fought in the Revolution in 1898 that are saying, we need to get in there because they're fighting the struggle we fought in 1776. So there are a lot of reasons to get involved in this war, but what's important about this story is why we get involved in this war. All right, so how do most people get their information today? This is the key. And two, in your opinion, what impact can information have on society? I want you guys to offer your opinions on this, and maybe as a rule in my next video, I'll refer back to some of your answers that you give me because, this isn't a live thing right now, even though we could do a live thing later on. Maybe I'll bring them up in the chat on Monday. But these are important questions. Think about today. How do we get our information? What information about the situation going on right now either helps or hurts or whatever it is? So that's all really relevant stuff. And it's stuff that's worth thinking about. How do you get your information? Where is it coming from? And what impact does it have, not only on us, but on the world, on society? So these are questions worth thinking about, especially going into next year. We're going to do a news literacy in senior year, and we talk about sourcing information and the media, and how to read the news in this wild west of news, which is the internet now, Twitter and whatever it is. All right, so how do most people get their information? The internet. Think back to 1898, though. In 1898, how do most people get their information? From when I taught this before, some of the popular answers, if you could think of anything, I'm sure you're thinking of word of mouth. People talk to each other, just like today. Rumors spread. But you don't have TV. Where do you get information? The news, the newspaper. Now, something changed during the Progressive Era. People took an interest in the poor, in the immigrant communities. People took an interest in those that didn't have. And one of the things that they felt people deserved was education. Like today, at this level, a lot of this stuff is just a more complex repeat of what you did at your lower level. But, when you're younger, you learn very valuable things in school. And one of those things is to read. And what 1898 saw was a boost in literacy, the ability to read. People were reading for the first time, people that had never knew how to read, and what this did, or read in English at least, and what this did was, like oil, like the railroads, like the car industry, it opens up a market that people can compete, and that market is things for people to read. They're reading now, and they want to read, so people are writing books, people are publishing newspapers, and if you want to sell more newspapers, how do you sell more papers than the guy at the stand next to you? Well, crazy headlines, maybe different colors, maybe pictures, and the tycoons or the robber barons or the captains of industry exist in this industry as well, in the print industry, and they get into competition with each other. Who can write the craziest story? Who can exaggerate the most? Who can write have the most ridiculous headlines? Things like that. All right, so that's where we're going here. So for the first slide, I'm going to hit the button. If you guys are at home, hit the button. Cuba. So the situation in Cuba, like I said, Cuba is a Spanish colony. This is Florida right here. 90 miles, right in the backyard of the United States. This is why Cuba and the U.S. have always had this really close relationship. Cuba, number one sport, is not soccer like it is in most of Latin America. Same thing for Nicaragua. Number one sport in both of these countries, baseball. And the reason why baseball is the number one sport in most of these countries is because of the close, sometimes awkward and uncomfortable, but close relationship that these nations have had to the United States in their history. That's why tensions are so high. They love American culture. They tend to really like American people, but they tend to not like the American government. All right. So it starts out, Cuba is a Spanish colony. All right. American companies invest in sugar plantations. If we've talked about the number one crop we have in the United States is corn. That's why if you turn around a bottle of Coca-Cola, it says high fructose corn syrup. It doesn't say sugar cane. Why is that? It's because it's expensive to import sugar cane, but we make tons of corn. So high fructose corn goes into everything that needs to be sweetened in the United States. Cuba makes sugar, and at this time, it's where we get our sugar. Sugar, coffee. Americans go down there. They plant these tremendous plantations. So they have an investment in Cuba financially. When the rebels start their revolution, now this isn't the Fidel Castro revolution. That's later on in the 50s or whatever. That's down the road. This is the original against the imperial nation revolution. Is a people's revolution against the Spanish Empire. Big business, business leaders step in and they say, hey, United States, you should come and help out, because if the sugar industry gets affected by this revolution, that's basically the sugar for the United States. We are a part of the American economy. And if we fail, too big to fail type of thing. So that's one reason why the U.S. government takes an interest in this war. But that's the business end. Those big sugar barons are in the ear of politicians saying, you should come and help out with this situation. Spain reacts harshly, really harshly, to these rebellions. So there's a secondary reason why, the American people now, not just the American government, the American businesses want to get involved in this war. They open up concentration camps for these rebels. And these are concentration camps proper, like the ones you would imagine from World War II with the Nazis. There's starvation camps. And if you rebel, you're going into these starvation camps. And that's where this media piece, like I was talking about before, comes in. Because this is a point where the media goes down there and really exaggerates the story and paints it in a way that the American public can't look away, and really blows it out of proportion. And the reason why they're doing this is twofold. A, they're in competition with each other. All right? So we'll go back to that. They're in competition with each other. The two guys are Joseph Pulitzer and William Randolph Hearst. All right? They're in competition with each other, these two dudes. This is Pulitzer, that's Hearst. So who can find the craziest picture? Who can write the craziest story? This is really what they're competing with. Think about the Daily News and the New York Times. Some of their headlines are ridiculous. And if you just Google images, New York Post or New York the New York Daily News, not the Times. The Times is pretty legit. In terms of their headlines and stuff. But the New York Post and the Daily News are the two that are like these guys, where then you can see examples of, them using nicknames and weird Photoshop photos and cartoonish, stuff to get your attention when you're in 7-Eleven or whatever. These guys were doing it, but they were using the SpanishAmerican War. So they exaggerate the news to attract readers. The newspapers embellish, which means exaggerate, basically, to creatively blow up something, to embellish the suffering of Cubans and increase public dislike for the Spanish. William Randolph Hearst, there's a quote in your notes that you should pay attention to. There's a quote in your notes from William Randolph Hearst saying basically, look, what would be really good for the news? A war. and he sent down a photojournalist, and the photojournalist, wires him back with telegraph saying, there's not really much going on in Cuba, sort of a dead end. Got a few photos, but not really, doesn't really add up to anything. And he basically told him, you furnish the photos and I'll furnish the war. You furnish the photos and I'll furnish the war. All right, I'm going to pause this real quick and plug in the phone. So, all right. So what does that mean? You furnish the photos, or furnish the photos, and I'll furnish the war. So let's go back to those photos I skipped. And if you look at this photo right here, this is the classic imagery of what you would think of when the image of a concentration camp. It literally was a starvation camp. These are real pictures from Cuba, the type that Hearst might publish in his newspaper of the mountains of skeletons, in Cuba. Now, like I said, the situation isn't what he's exaggerating as much as, he's putting the pieces together in a way to purposefully rile up the American public. These things really happened. So what the Cubans were facing was a horrific situation. And I don't want you to think that it wasn't. But what Hearst was doing was purposefully and getting the United States involved in a war. So here it is. You furnish the pictures, I'll furnish the war. So what are some of the problematic terms we have here? And again, I'm going to give you the answer because I can't hear your response, but you should fill this out. What's your interpretation of the quote? In your opinion, is there significance today? Furnish here is the problematic word, I would say, vocab word. And what that means, basically, furnish means supply, You supply the photos, and I'll supply you with a war. Hey, look, Hearst, there's nothing really going on in Cuba. Don't worry about it. It doesn't really add up to a bad situation, there's concentration camps, but I don't think there's really much to write about. And Hearst basically says, look, send me any photos, any terrible stuff you see down there, and I'm gonna give you a war. Now, this is a newspaper editor promising that he's going to get the United States in a war with Spain, with another country. This would be like a TV or a YouTube star saying, I'm going to use my videos and I'm going to get the U.S. in a war with Mexico or something. Or I'm going to get the U.S. in a war with South Korea or North Korea, whatever it is. I'm going to use my videos to start a war. That's a tremendous claim. But the miraculous part about this story and why it's important is it worked. He did it. He said he was going to do it. And he did it. He, basically like in the words of Noam Chomsky in his book, Manufacturing Consent, he manufactured the consent or the permission of the American people to go to war with Spain. All right. So, photo over here. Now, I don't have the ability to write on here, but you could follow along with me. Pop it up. What do we got going on? Some of the key players here. This guy, first of all, dressed in the... Now, these political cartoons, I was talking to Grasso early this morning on the phone, and we were saying how, these political cartoons would never fly today because they use such stereotypical or borderline racist imagery when it gets to some of the other, groups. But this guy here, if you could see on your computers at home, across his belt, it says Spain. So obviously that guy represents Spain. Now, can we identify him as if we didn't see that on his belt? Well, anybody who knows about Spanish culture, Spaniard culture. If you've been to Spain, he's dressed as a matador. Matador is like a bullfighter, very traditional Spanish sport. And again, it would be like saying he's from Japan and he's dressed as a sumo wrestler. It's pretty prejudiced in terms of the way we look at things today. But back then, that's how they identified people. Oh, obviously, matador from Spain. So that's a matador, He represents the country or the empire at that time of Spain. And he's stomping somebody out. And who are they? Well, if you look on the shirt down here, it says Cuba. Now, there's a difference in complexion. The Spanish person is lighter. The Cuban person has darker skin. That's also not an accident. Now, while this is happening, right across the river, 1 foot from this side. This person is asleep. And who does this person represent? Well, if you look at their clothes, you could probably guess they represent the United States. She's literally wearing an American flag. Stars and stripes, And if you want to take it further, down here on her dress, it says Columbia. Now, do you remember the picture of Manifest Destiny with the angel walking across? That angel was Columbia. She's kind of like the female version of Uncle Sam, and shout out to Mr. Grasso. He always points that out. He's a fan of the imagery of Columbia, and I suspect from the conversations that we've had with the class, it's because it's something that's kind of lost at this point. Nobody really remembers Columbia. Everybody knows Uncle Sam because they used it through World War II, but before Uncle Sam, in the late 1800s, when they were kind of figuring out the personification of the United States in political cartoons and stuff, Columbia is really the character. So she's asleep at the wheel, and they're trying to tap her on the shoulder over here, and it's the founders, the founding fathers. Literally, they're saying, wake up to this situation. Wake up. Look what's happening in your backyard. Spain is mistreating somebody. And you see, she's got the newspaper in her hand. Over here, it's like the one of our founding documents. So all this imagery is there basically in the modern vernacular telling people to get woke, and that's what that expression means. To wake up to the things that are going on in your world, to educate yourself. It's overused now, and it's basically just a meme. But get woke, Columbia. All right, another famous cartoon. I don't want to spend too much time on it because I don't want to make these videos too long. You can see I could go on and on. All right, have a Cuban lady here in the frying pan. And the frying pan says Spanish misrule and anarchy, which means a lack of government. Lack of government, mismanagement. It says Cuba on her dress, so that's why we know she's Cuban. Also, she has a Cuban flag. Somebody pointed out in one of my PM school classes, thank you for doing so, that it looks very similar to the Puerto Rican flag. Absolutely. It also looks very similar to a Texas flag and the flag of Catalonia in Barcelona. So all of those flags, the idea is the single star represents that we are part of something, but we're not. Texas, the Lone Star Republic, the single star represents that they see themselves as a separate nation among the people of the United States. So you can take that idea and translate it. Catalonia, definitely, they've been fighting for their independence from Spain for a few years now, for a while. And you could say the same of Cuba maybe at this time, and definitely Puerto Rico today, even though they are a territory, you have a form of U.S. citizenship, there's still that a feeling that you have a separate identity than just American, All right. We talked about this. The DeLome letter. So they're writing about the horrors in Cuba, and the American people are sympathetic now. But that's not the only way. That's not the only thing that will get us into this war. Other things need to happen. There's 2 other things that happen. A, Cuban rebels intercept a letter from the Spanish government, basically, to one of his people on the island, saying the president of the United States is weak. He's a dope. He can't handle this situation. And the people of the United States get mad and they say, you need to do something. Now, the president of the United States does not want to get into a war with Spain. He's a conservative president. He doesn't want to get into something that's going to cost American lives, cost American money, and he doesn't want to get into a war over this little island of Cuba. So he says no. So a halfway measure to calm the American people, he sends a battleship to Spain to park in Havana Harbor, the battleship Maine, USS Maine. And this is sort of like, look, Spain, we heard what you said, we see what you're doing, and we're showing force. We're basically going to park a battleship here to make sure things go our way, all right? So they park, after this letter makes the president look stupid, his move is, I'm going to park this letter in Havana, I'm going to park this boat in Havana Harbor, big battleship for its day, and just stand there with the muscle, This is called the USS Maine. Problem is, after being parked there for a little bit, the Maine explodes. And The newspapers couldn't have asked for something better because they're looking for a reason to get mad at Spain. They have the suffering of Cubans, saying things like they're feeding babies to the sharks down there. We need to get in there. The president says, no, no, no. The American people say, I don't know. Then you have this letter. The American people say, come on. And finally this happens. And the newspapers right away point the finger right at Spain. They say, destruction of Maine was the work of an enemy. They got elaborate handwritten drawings of the Maine with these mines under the water that blew it up. They have $50,000. Well, the newspaper article is in here. $50,000 for any info leading to the people who perpetrated. They just blame, and people read this. It's irresponsible. The people believe that Spain sunk this ship right away. And with that, the people of the United States asked for war. They've had enough. This was the straw that broke the camel's back. This is William Randolph Hearst's ticket to war. And this, writing the newspapers in that way, was how he single-handedly, almost single-handedly, got us into this war. 266 American troops are killed at this explosion, and that's not it's not a small number. You don't hear numbers like that today. I mean, we've had more in other wars, but these were preventative measures. They weren't going there to fight. They were going there to park in the harbor and hang with the rebels and make sure things go smooth. They were just a show of force. And now so Congress declares war on Spain, April 20th, 1898. Because the newspapers blame Spain and the American people ask for war. Years later, they do a study of the Maine and they find out that it was a boiler eruption that sank this ship. It was a boiler eruption. So the United States got into this war because of the fervor created by William Randolph Hearst and bad information, basically. So they had the ammunition stores and the boilers very close to each other, and the heat in Cuba wasn't something that these ships were either designed for or the crew was ready for, and something happened and one ignited the other and blew the whole ship up. It was an accident. It was a mechanical failure. And we know that today, but that's why this is a crazy story. When you got to keep thinking back to that media piece, and just look at the way that they portray the Spanish here. It says the Spanish brute. A brute is like a big animal monster. And he's got a bloody knife in his hand, and it says, Maine sailors murdered by Spain. Like they really, really went all in on this idea. And this is that newspaper article. Pull it up. Destruction of warship Maine was the work of an enemy. Down here they have the diagrams of the mine and how it happened. And people saw this, and it was their one source of information. It wasn't like today where you're like, you see a news article and you think, or you should think, like, is this real? Is it not? Back then, it's like, this is the news. This is the news. It took people a while to navigate that environment. Like today, the internet is exploding so fast, taking people a while to navigate the environment. All right. So, I'm thinking if we should get into this or we should save it for the next lesson. Let me think. What do we got? All right, so let's do this first, and we'll go back to that map. So the results of the war. And this is why I wore my my Roosevelt shirt today. Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt is like an American action figure. An American action figure in that he's larger than life, and he's this crazy, crazy personality. He's eccentric, which means that he's he breaks the norms, social norms, and he goes above and beyond to really get a reaction out of people. So, like Andrew Jackson in the Battle of New Orleans, this is the event that really makes Teddy Roosevelt famous in the minds of American people and really leads to him gaining that fame to become an American president later on. He becomes an American president through assassination of the president. He was the VP, the president before him. But but people loved Teddy Roosevelt, and this is one of the reasons. So the results, Teddy Roosevelt, I mentioned this before in the Progressive Era, Teddy Roosevelt is a maniac. He's a politician at this time, and basically he quits his job in politics and he goes to fight this war on his own. And he collects a group that he calls the Rough Riders, which is just a group of tough guys that, he goes around the country and collects people like gunslingers and longshoremen and, prize fighters. And it's crazy. He just collects this group of people. It's like he assembles the Avengers of 1898 or whatever. And he goes into battle. He also takes reporters with him into battle because he wants those photos and he wants that write-up about what he's doing. He does it purposefully. And one of the points about this story that they talk about today is that along with Teddy Roosevelt riding into battle, he brought about a few hundred of the first African-American soldiers, and they really did the bulk of the fighting and the work in San Juan when he charges up the hill. And he really gives them credit for that, and he has an admiration for them afterward. And there are certain books, me and Grasso were discussing this too, where Teddy, really takes his hat off to them. But, make no mistake, when they snap the photos, when they write the stories, he's at the front of the charge, I wish this was a touch screen. He's at the front of the charge, sword in hand, and he's the one they write the stories about. So U.S. beats Spain easily. 3 months. The Spanish Empire is on the decline. With the help of the rebels who are really dug in and fighting passionately, that United States boost is all they needed. 3 months. The United States comes in and cleans it all up. Paris Treaty of 1898. Now here's where we get into some trouble. I like to upload the two assignments for this week. Will be focused on this question. Spanish-American War for the United States was an easy war. They called it the splendid little war, a lot of these politicians, We'll talk about that later, about the idea of war, how it changes after World War I. But what's important here is the Spanish-American War is just the intro to the movie. After the Spanish-American War, the United States, it was like the last blow on the chin of Spain. They fall down. They're out for the count. Now they're not an empire anymore. After they fall, the United States is left with this problem. Cuba, this is where we go back to this. Cuba, Puerto Rico, Guam, the Philippines, all fall in the lap of the United States at this point. And the U.S. is asking itself a question. And now, this is where I keep stressing this point in class. The United States is not one person. Think about today, the different political opinions that exist, the different arguments. Now, you want somebody to look back on this point in history and identify only one point of that argument, one side, and say that's what the United States felt at that time. Let's say it's universal health care or whatever. You wouldn't want, if you were a Bernie supporter, somebody to look back and say that the United States only was against universal health care. Or if you're a Trump supporter or a part of the other side of that, whatever the other side is, you wouldn't want people to look back and say all Americans were in favor of universal health care. That's just one political issue. The United States is always more than one person. And that's the thing about the U.S. And back then, crazy that historians didn't realize this until recently, as maybe 10 or 20 years ago, there was a vigorous debate at this time. Now that all of these former Spanish colonies fall in the lap of the United States, what does the U.S. do? It's basically like their government has fallen. And you can either let them fight it out and let them figure it out, or you can stay around and help them get set up. Now, initially, a lot of people like that idea. People like Mark Twain, people like Andrew Carnegie like that idea. And they say, yes, we should help out. Let's get them set up. But it becomes apparent really quick that the people in power don't intend to help them get set up and turn over the keys to the house. They don't trust them. And there's too much money at stake in the resources that these places have if they don't play ball with the United States. They want to help them get set up and then run them like Spain did, just a new landlord, a new boss in town. And this is where we have a divergence in opinion in the United States between the imperialists and the anti-imperialists. Should the United States, a former colony of Great Britain, start to take colonies? It's sort of like Anakin becoming Darth Vader. Should we, someone who fought against an imperial nation, the opposite of what it represents to be imperial, take the step into the ring of imperialism? Do we have a responsibility maybe to do so? Maybe, all right, if you want to keep the Star Wars stuff going, there's that point in the new movies where and if you haven't seen them, I'm sorry, whatever, where, Kylo Ren is telling Rey, he's like, we have the keys to the car now, and if you want to change the galaxy, like, we can go do that right now. And the first time you see it, you're like, no, he's evil, the dark side and whatever, the light. And I'm watching it again and I'm like, he's kind of right. Like they literally can start over and run the galaxy however they want. So that's the argument the imperialists are making at that point. We have it in our hands to run a big part of the world the way we want now. And the anti-imperialists say, no, no, no. You said we were going to help them get set up and leave them on their way. It's too much responsibility, it's too much power, and it's against our morals as a rebellious nation. All right, so that's the situation that the Spanish-American War leaves us in. Differing views on expansion in Philippines and the nationwide debate over imperialism. U.S. pays $20 million to Spain to get the Philippines. This leads to the U.S. becoming an empire. And then tomorrow, we'll talk about the imperialists and the anti-imperialists and the arguments. This is one of the most important and one of the most forgotten periods in U.S. history. And it's so relevant. You could either apply it to American intervention today, or you could apply it to any political issue today. And what I want to stress is, just like every political issue today, there's not, maybe there is, but there isn't really an American and an un-American opinion here. These are both American opinions. Like, people that have done things that are questionable in American history, let's say like Andrew Jackson, yes, he's American. Or somebody like, the founding fathers who also owned slaves, they're American. But also people like Eugene Debs and Martin Luther King, FDR, they're also American. So both of those people represent what it means to be American. So you can't have one without, not that you can't have one without the other, but how do I want to say this? Don't just point at one and say that's what the United States is all about. Because there's always the other. There's always whatever you think is the bad idea, there's always somebody else that's the good idea. And we invented this stuff, we invented this stuff. We wrote the Declaration of Independence and everybody copied us after that. They might be ahead of us in some areas, but, they were looking and they, can I copy your homework? Yeah, but just change it. With all the constitutions. And we still have one of the longest running, if not the longest running constitution. All right. So, exit pass. How did yellow press or yellow journalism affect the relationship between the United States and Spain? Now, this is not an accident question. How we use the word relationship here. This is a Regent-style question. So, answer this. And if you can, in your opinion, was the United States justified in going to war against Spain? Declaring war on Spain, let me know. So answer this on the documents. You could always comment below. Subscribe, like my YouTube page, whatever. You can only access my videos, by the way. I'm going to change this. The first video I posted is up for the public, but the rest of the videos, you can only access it through the link. I don't want people from the internet coming in and meddling and being crazy. So you can only access it through the link, but share that link with whoever you want. If your parents want to check out the videos, whatever it is, if they want to ask me questions. You know, if your other classmates in other U.S. classes are having a hard time, send them these videos, whatever it is. All right. All right, guys. I'll see you soon. Thank you very much. Monday we'll be on the video chat.